Today on the Jere Metcalf Podcast, best of interviews on negotiating, pulling 4 clips from 4 former interviews. Number 1, we've got Chris Voss, none other than the author of the renowned bestseller, Never Split the Difference. Brandon Voss, co-founder with Chris of the Black Swan Group. The Black Swan Group is the leading negotiating consultant company whose success is founded in the real art of negotiating and mastering the intricacies of no, not yes. Also, we've got Dan Encell. He is the number 1 agent in sales in Santa Barbara and ranked in the top 10 worldwide of all brokers with Berkshire Hathaway. Last but not least, Eric Lavey of the Sotheby's International Realty office in Beverly Hills. Using the practices of the Black Swan Group, he has grown to be a top 75 real estate agent in LA in just a few short years. Thanks for listening to the Jere Metcalf Podcast, where top real estate agents tell how they do it. This podcast was created for real estate agents across the country to come together, sharing ideas to take your, their, and our business to the next level. And here he is, Chris Voss, author of the renowned Never Split the Difference. What advice do you have for real estate agents when it comes to negotiating?
Well, it's really kind of interesting because, you got people whose hopes and dreams are on the line. You know, everybody knows that buying or selling of a house is one of the most stressful events in anybody's life. You know that, but you don't know how to deal with it. And the real issue is there's so many negative emotions, so many bad things going to happen. The 2 millimeter shift really is for real estate agents is don't ignore or deny the negatives. You know, most people try to deal with negative emotions and transactions by saying, I don't want you to feel, I don't want you to worry, I don't want you to be concerned. You know, the denial aspect doesn't work, which is why most people have their default is to ignore. We know problems are coming, so we're going to pretend like they're not coming. And we're going to close our eyes and hopefully.
Well, it's kind of like saying, don't think about an elephant.
Right.
Don't worry.
Right. Or the elephant in the room, because that's a great analogy. And nobody ever made the elephant in the room go away by saying, don't think about that elephant, or by ignoring the elephant. Mm-hmm. Now, the crazy thing that we learned in hostage negotiation, and we didn't realize it was all life, but negative emotions really drive our decision making. That's why we talk about them so much. So the 2 millimeter shift from a hostage negotiator is to say, instead of saying, I don't want you to be worried about this, you say, I'm sure seems worrisome. I mean, just calling it out in that tiny little difference makes a massive difference right away. And it's against people's gut instinct because they think denying it is equivalent of calling it out. And learning that tiny skill is huge, especially for real estate agents.
I love what you said about the millimeter shift, because a lot of people think they have to make these drastic shifts to get drastic changes. But usually it's that much of a change in what you're doing and how you're doing it that's going to make the huge impact on the results of what you're getting and dealing with negotiating and people.
Absolutely, especially when consistently applied.
Well, there you go. And then you talked about saying how did you put that? It seems like this could be worrisome. Was that one of the things that you just said?
Yeah, or it seems like this is scary. I mean, buying a house is a scary process. You know, you want to say to a client, I don't want you to be scared. And instead, this is scary.
Well, and it puts you on the other side of the table. They're scared, but you don't want them to be scared. You're pointing out scared, but you're saying they shouldn't be, and now they're scared anyway. And now what did you just do but exacerbate it?
Right.
So
that's exactly right.
And you talk in your book about it's what you call labeling. When you say it seems like you're scared, or you label an emotion that they may, and it could be labeling, or we talk about mislabeling. But when you label an emotion, to label it and identify it for that person, I know you talk about a study where by doing that, it literally can help diffuse that emotion.
Yeah, and again, and we'll make the distinction, negative emotions here, because, like opposite ends of a magnet, they act differently. But the negative emotions, a book called The Upward Spiral, they monitored people's brain activity with an fMRI so they could actually watch the electrical activity. And they showed them a picture that induced a negative emotion, and they simply asked the person to identify that emotion, which is what a label does. It identifies it. And every single time when they identified the emotion, the electrical activity in the negative area of the brain where the negative emotions are, every time it diminished, simply by identifying it.
And the thing that I love about that is in the past, and I've even talked to people about identifying emotions, and they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. That just makes it worse. And I just find that so funny. Like, very intelligent, well-educated people have had that response. But when you apply it, whether it's to my children or to my clients or to whatever situation or to the agent on the other end of the table or sometimes to whoever, it is amazing. And just having that study to prove it, how much it does that. Now, something else, and I'm going to ask you the next question, I'm going to ask you the next question first because it may lead to it. I don't want to jump the gun on you. So what do you think, and we may have drilled into this a little bit already, but what do you think the biggest mistake is that real estate agents make when they negotiate contracts?
I think just being impatient. The real estate agent's version of value and the buyer's and the seller's version of value is not the same thing. Mm-hmm. The real estate agent wants to get this done quickly. And they think it's to everybody's advantage that it be done quickly. Well, it's not. I mean, unfortunately, that's a little bit selfish. A real estate agent wants to get it done quickly because the real estate agent is under some very real pressures. You want to get paid. Mm-hmm. But what the truth of the matter is, the last impression is the lasting impression. There's scientific data. Again, the Gallup poll created this data. People don't remember things how they happen. They remember them how they ended. So the final sales price is going to be the lasting impression, not how long it took. So the idea of trying to make meet in the middle, push the transaction together, will cause a buyer or a seller to have a bad lasting impression, which then means that's what kills real estate agents' referral pipeline. That's why 80% of the people involved in a transaction will say they would refer their agent, and only 20% of them do. Because if people feel pushed into a transaction, the last impression is a bad impression. Mm-hmm. Even if the agent did a phenomenal job.
Well, you're so
everything
right.
Beautifully.
One of the first things I learned from your book is getting to yes versus no. Everybody's got this impression when they negotiate, the idea is to convince and get to yes. What is that? What is the reality behind that, and what does that mean?
Well, what happens is people feel trapped. They feel tied down. They feel cornered. And every time you do that, you're putting toxin on the relationship. You're putting toxin on the trust tree. I mean, if you were to look up that style, they call it the yes momentum or momentum selling. I mean, it comes under a lot of different terms. They say that each yes is a micro agreement. And if you get enough micro agreements, they have to give you yes to the big agreement.
That's called manipulation, by the way.
And it's trapping people. People hate it. I mean, everybody hates it. It's insane. And it's what kills relationships. It's why people are uncomfortable dealing with you.
And it's how it makes people feel.
Anyone in general.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
No, and how it makes people feel. Getting in that, like you say this, I'm taking all this stuff from you, but people come to you, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Or so on that, I'm fine. Like, really, are you? There are 3 kinds of yeses that you talk about. So getting people to say no. You'd be surprised what people would say no to. Give us an example. You have an example of you're at a book signing, or if you've got a better one, but you're at a book signing and you had like less than 5 seconds and the guy's got like bodyguards and you're walking up and you just want him to speak to your students of I don't know if it was a workshop you were doing or what, but give us the story of how you took a couple of seconds to get him to agree to something.
Well, since I know how bad yes is and how good no is, it's Jack Welch. He's at a book signing. He and his wife Susie are signing the Real Life MBA. I want him to come and speak at my class at USC. Jack Welch was the CEO of GE, and he's got several monster books out there. He's a true celebrity. And I just walk up and I say, is it a ridiculous idea for you to come and speak at the negotiation course I teach at USC? And he kind of stares at me, and then he gets this real scowl on his face. I mean, like incredibly intense scowl. Right. And he looks up into the sky behind me and to the left, and he just freezes. I mean, he looked furious. And this Jack Welch's not a young guy, so he had this furious look on his face. I was genuinely afraid that he'd had a stroke.
The bodyguards were going to drag you out, right?
Yeah. I thought they were going to tackle me because I hurt him or because I made him mad, or he's going to start screaming at security. He looked so angry. But when his face finally unfroze, that was the way he looked when he was concentrating and thinking. And he looks at me and he says, "This is my personal assistant's name. This is a Twitter account we have set up to talk with her. I will call her and tell her who you are, what you want. I think we're going to be in Los Angeles in the fall. If we are, we'll come in and speak at your course."
And you got all of that out of him by saying, would it be ridiculous if you spoke to my students?
A single no is worth at least 5 yeses. At least.
So
as far as helping people think stuff through.
Speaking of yeses, so people think they want a yes. I love it. I'm like, my name is Jere Metcalf. I'm addicted to yes. We are all addicted to yes.
Hi, Jerry.
Everybody. No. So speaking of yes, the thing we forget and we know, but we forget is there are lots of kinds of yeses. And you talk about what are the different kinds of yeses?
Commitment, confirmation, and the one we hear most often, counterfeit.
Exactly. And usually when we're getting that yes and pushing for it, it's the counterfeit yes that we get. And next is Brandon Voss, co-founder of the Black Swan Group with Chris Voss. Tell us a little bit about, I don't know if this is your first job or first sales job, but you were door-to-door. Doesn't everybody love door-to-door sales? Door-to-door with Verizon.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about
that. You'll earn your bones going door-to-door, especially in the sales world. I don't know if there's a tougher way to do sales than to go door-to-door in person with people. Calling on the phone is tough,
more uncomfortable.
Door-to-door is that it builds a whole new set of neural pathways that I think the only way you can get it is going door-to-door.
And what I want everybody to know is as we're going through this, we're going to take this from what you learned as a child, kind of just intuitively witnessing your dad, how you applied this to your making money with your job, for example, Verizon. And now I want everybody to really listen to this because this is going to apply to how you are now helping people do, $100 million plus deals in transactions between businesses today. So going backwards from your, $100 million deals that you're helping people negotiate, this is great, just bringing it to grassroots on how you were learning and applying it in experiences like Verizon. So give us some of your fun stuff here.
Yeah, well, the one nice thing, no matter what's at stake, no matter what industry you're in, no matter how much skin in the game you have, human nature is the same no matter where you're at.
Exactly.
And if you can wrap your mind around what is triggering negative thoughts simply from a human nature dynamic and address those at the very beginning of the conversation, you are catapulting yourself forward as far as what it's going to take to reach trust-based influence and an agreement with that person. And so, soliciting, going door to door, especially having to get into a place that's got no soliciting sign right in the center of their door, right at eye level.
Still so going to their door.
Exactly. So everybody like me can see it very clearly when they get there.
And you just said trust-based influence. You're talking about trust-based influence and walking up to somebody's door that says no solicitors, and you're going to somehow get influence with somebody that is somehow trust-based, knocking on their no solicitors front door. Tell us how you do that.
Right, exactly. And it's a combination of things. And I'm sure our listeners, you could probably surmise what you might be thinking if you're a small business shop or store owner and a dope like me comes in off the street, clearly soliciting, and you got that sign on your door. You can probably imagine what you might be thinking.
Right. And so, or you're a real estate agent, which most of our listeners are, And think about all the telemarketers that are calling us every day, like 50. Anyway.
Right.
But go ahead. But go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly
So
right.
go ahead.
Exactly right.
So go ahead and give us some fun examples of how you did this.
And so the first thing would say, especially if that sign was there, the first thing out of my mouth would generally be something along the lines of, I know you got that sign on the door for a reason.
Oh,
And that's the first place that I want to go, is I want to address that and let them know, like, yeah, I did see it. I'm still here, but I do respect. I still got a lot of respect for you. And then also, I'm not going to waste your time. That's the other thing. Salespeople, they waste shop owners' time.
But everybody says, I'm not going to waste your time. And that is code for the listener to, you're wasting my time. So that's not what you say.
Exactly.
You say something that sends the message, but go ahead.
Exactly right. And so, you can't actually say the words. You can't actually say the words, I'm not going to waste your time. How do you indicate that to them without actually doing it? And so one of the real quick ways to do it is to actually put a time limit on it. Like, I am not going to take more than 8 minutes out of your day. Mm-hmm. And then make sure that you finish sooner than that. So if I tell somebody I want 8 minutes of their time, there's no way I'm going past 7 minutes. At the very least, I want to leave the lasting impression of, wow, he actually took less time than he said he would. Exactly. I want them thinking that when I'm walking out the door. But and then also, ignoring the question, is it going to be a bad idea for me to relay this out for you? So that's a real easy way to do it. And going back to solicitation, right? I know that you got that sign on the door for a reason. Mm-hmm. The last thing you want to do during your day, as busy as you are, is talk to some schmuck salesman that's walking off the street trying to get you to buy something. And then I would just go quiet. And 8 times out of 10, they would laugh.
So first of all,
I
want everybody to get what you just said. That is so important in communicating, whether you're negotiating a deal or knocking on doors, is that, and then you go quiet.
Yeah. You got to go silent. That's the thing. The emotional moment that you're creating, you got to let it sink in.
The emotional moment you're creating, you've got to let it sink in. And that's why that was the biggest thing I learned from that book. Obviously, everybody listens to the show knows I love to talk. But on that, you go quiet. I just want to really drive that home for everybody listening. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, and also and to add to that, because I think kind of where you're going with this, and by the way, you listeners, you already know Jere has immersed herself in our stuff, and I have even learned stuff from Jere that I make it a point to teach all the time now when we're in front of groups, because Jere's even taught me some things.
I don't know about that. I just gave you some examples, but keep going. Keep going. I'll take it. Keep going.
That's great. Now, you told me some great stuff about triggers, and for you personally, that I think directly relates to a lot of problems individuals are facing. You managed to figure it out for yourself, which is fantastic. But what Jere's getting at, and going silent and letting these emotional moments sink in, one of the things that we will do is we will coach people to actually count Mississippis or count 1000s in their head when they're getting ready to go silent on someone. Because as we all know, silence creates a void. It creates this awkwardness that we feel this need to want to fill. Well, the flip side is the other side feels it too. And if you're the one that's creating the silence, you are in control of that moment. And just being able to count Mississippi's, count 1000s will keep you in your chair. 4 is the magic number. Waiting for the other side. Yeah, exactly. Minimum of 4. Don't count less than 4.
I think you said one time you've gotten to 7. Before usually
7's the longest I've gone. Yeah, 7's the longest. And in the last 10 years, 7 is the longest I've ever gone.
That's awesome. So obviously you got so much out of watching your dad work for the FBI. And I think there's a lot, and what I'm fascinated by is he worked with the FBI. He learned a lot from that job, but there's a lot that there were also mistakes that were made and more things that you learned and were able to apply as you guys will read this in the book, or if you've read it, you'll hear it in the book. But it talks about different things that you went and learned and realized, like, this is really powerful stuff that we need to share with the world. So you and your dad started Black Swan Group and signed on that company together. And in starting Black Swan Group, kind of give us a little bit of, like, how did that happen? How did you decide that this was the thing to do? And how did you know it was, share with me how that went and how that came about. And when did you figure out real estate agents? You had so much to offer specifically for us residential real estate agents.
Yeah, no, great question. And the evolution really started years ago. You know, as you mentioned about being an entrepreneur, been lucky enough to come from an entrepreneurial background. My grandfather, my dad's dad, he was an entrepreneur. And I started working for him at a young age. When I was going out there to see them in the summertime, he put me to work at the age of 6. And then I started working full days at the age of 8. So half days at 6 and 7, working full days at 8 years old. And then in my teenage years, I ran my own boat detailing business here in the DC area and had a crew of 5 guys that worked for me when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, right? All those summer years in between school. And when my father was going to get out of the bureau, he always had aspirations of owning his own business and being an entrepreneur too, and decided he wanted to bring this knowledge about negotiation that he learned from the government and adapt it and morph it and change it and teach it to the private sector. And that's kind of really where the aspiration started. Mm-hmm. And so, in the book, he talks about going to Harvard once he got out of the bureau while he was there.
That's the beginning. I love that.
Yeah. There's some cool stories in there. There's some cool stories.
Yeah, tell us about that. Tell us
about
his visit to Harvard, if you had a story for us about that.
Yeah. So he's essentially up at Cambridge. He's still going to Harvard while the business is on paper. So we're technically a business, right, and on paperwork, but we're not actually dealing with any clients because I'm still working in sales at the time, and he's still at Harvard getting his master's. And so 2010 rolls around, and we got a contract to help an international group form their own negotiation team. And that was a contract that lasted the course of a year. And that's when I started working for him. You know, he was a one-man shop at the time, obviously.
What year was that?
That was 2010. 2010.
Okay. I knew that,
January 2010 is when I started. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we have Dan Encell, the #1 agent in Santa Barbara and top 10 worldwide with Berkshire Hathaway.
So in negotiating, what are the categories, or what are if you could bullet point, like, this is what you need to be good at to be a great negotiator?
Okay.
What are they?
So I think the very first thing you need to do is understand the other person and what motivates them. And then when you're negotiating in real estate, sometimes there's both sides. You need to understand your client and what motivates them, and you need to understand the other side and what motivates them. Once you understand that, and you can communicate with everybody, that increases your chances of having a successful negotiation. But without knowing what's important to everybody, without finding that out, you can't really be an effective negotiator. So I think that's the first step, is learning as much as you can about both sides and what's really, if you have a listing, what's motivating them to sell? What's their time frame? Why are they moving? How can you help them? When you get an offer on your listing, what's motivating the buyer? You already understand your side of the equation. What's motivating the buyer? So you don't really want to operate from a vacuum. You want to learn as much as you can about the other side and really what's motivating them. That helps you when you're discussing with your client how to move this forward. So the first step is just learning as much as you can.
So #1, learn.
By asking a lot of questions.
Yes. So what is #2? I've got some questions about #1, but I want us to bullet point these first.
So I think it's also important to let the other side know that you know what's motivating them, so that they understand that you're operating from full knowledge there. So it's not enough to understand what's motivating the other side. I think you need to let them know that you understand what's motivating them and that you're trying to, help out with that goal for everybody. Ideally, it's possible in real estate transactions to come up with a win-win scenario. And again, if you understand what everyone's looking for and you can achieve that, that's fantastic.
And are we going to do like 3 points, or everybody, we're doing this completely off the cuff, which sometimes makes it even better. But would you say, so learn, listen, ask the right questions, i.e. discover the right motivators of everyone involved.
Everyone involved.
Let the other people know that you're negotiating with. what you know, and that you're working to help them accomplish their goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's
number 3? I am a firm believer in don't speak for your clients. So many times in real estate, you see another agent say, oh, my client will never pay that much, or my client would never accept that offer. We've seen that for our entire careers, and frequently that other agent is wrong. Don't speak for your client.
Ever. Do not think or speak for your client, ever.
Right. And it's such a temptation for agents. They want to be in charge and they want to be their client's hero. But again, a lot of times they don't really understand everything that's going on. And you and I have been surprised numerous times in terms of we'll have a seller who says they'll never take below X, and then a good offer comes in, and lo and behold, they're willing to come way below X. Similarly, we've had buyers, it's like, it's as much as I'm paying, and then, another offer come in and they'll go way above that. So don't assume and don't speak for your client. I think those are 2 really important rules for real estate agents in negotiations there.
So is that it? Are those the 3, or do we have any
I think those are 3 important ones for sure.
So let's talk about the 3. Know the motivators of all parties. I think some people just want to know their motivators and they forget that the other party's motivators make a big difference. Let the other side about their motivators. That's number 2. And number 3, don't speak for your clients, or in other words, don't make assumptions.
Yes, I think those are all important.
Maybe they say it where you're from too, Dan, but in the South, you know what we say about assuming?
Yes.
Makes an ass out of you and me.
Mm-hmm.
We can say ass on this show because we're not like on the radio or anything. So that being said, what is the best way? The motivator question, I got a couple of questions about, because when you're discovering motivators of people, sometimes they don't think they want you to know their motivators. They don't tell you their motivators. How do you pull out those motivators? Are there situations where people have motivators they're not even conscious of, for example, themselves?
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of times, so say you have a listing there and they're set on a certain price because they want to accomplish certain goals there. But then they get an offer in front of them and they start thinking, again, without sharing it necessarily with you, but call it pillow talk with their spouse there, about what they could do with the money. Yes, it didn't accomplish everything we tried to accomplish, but if we got it sold for this price, we could do this, this, and this. And sometimes it's helpful to get them a seller net sheet and say, hey, if we got this amount, and here's your closing costs at this amount, here's how much money you get. And let them think about it and think of all the things that they could do with the money there. And again, I think a lot of times we're surprised at what they are willing to accept there. And that's still doing a good job for them, because again, if we can improve their situation by getting them a sale and allowing them to do many of the things they want to accomplish with the money, then we've done our job there. Again, we don't necessarily accomplish everything that they're looking for, but that's sort of the nature of the business there. And also maybe how realistic their expectations were.
So do you find that when I know you do, motivators change. How do you anticipate these motivators changing? I find that often real estate agents talk about, they weren't that motivated to sell and suddenly they were motivated to sell. Motivations change. You've got to discover motivations. You don't always know what they are. Then motivations change. How do you know when they're going to change? How do you anticipate? And one of the biggest issues we agents have is we come into a transaction or a client or whatever it is, and motivations are in one place. And it's like the ground might shift underneath us and it goes to another. What is your best advice on, it's a loaded question, but kind of like fill us in on that part of understanding motivations.
So again, it comes down to what's a really important skill for a real estate agent all the way across the board, which is ask a lot of questions and be a good listener once you've asked the questions. So don't assume you know the answers, ask the questions, and then sit back and listen and let them talk and explain it to you, and ask the questions in a way that generates the responses. So I think those are important skills for a real estate agent to have.
And I want to bring some poker into this a little bit.
Okay.
When you're playing poker, what it will bring back in these 3 points again, know the motivations of all sides, share with the other side what you know, and that you're going to help them get what they want. And don't speak for your clients. Don't make assumptions. Do you have any fun examples of us playing poker of a time where something happened and you're like, oh, I knew not to do that, or and are you thinking about how that applies to negotiating real estate when you're playing poker?
Well, again, I try to, during poker, use that as a learning experience to improve my real estate negotiation skills for sure. But rarely in poker does somebody have the very best hand possible. And even if they do, the goal isn't necessarily winning the hand. If you've got the best hand possible, you already know you're going to win. There is no other outcome. But unless you maximize how much money you made, then you really didn't do a very good job about it. So in poker, it's not necessarily about winning the hand. It's about making as much money as you possibly could in winning that hand. So it's sort of a two-part goal. Win as much as you can on the hands that you win, and minimize losing as little as you can on the hands that you don't win. So look at losing like taking a bad listing where you took a listing that's overpriced, or you didn't have it for a long enough period of time and you spent time and money on it and you didn't get a sale. That's like losing a hand in poker. You want to minimize those. A successful one is one that you actually got it listed at the right price and you got it sold and you made money. So you want to sort of maximize those. Poker's the same way. Again, if you can win more hands than you lose, you don't necessarily make money. You have to make more money on the hands that you win than you do losing money on the hands that you lose. That's really what it's about. So it's sort of a combination of maximizing success, minimizing failure. And again, that's the key to being a successful real estate agent, is using your time wisely so that you're spending it on the buyers and sellers that are more likely to lead to a successful result than the buyers and sellers that are going to take your time and energy and not lead to a successful result. So same sort of thing, just a different format. Minimize your losses, maximize your wins.
Last but not least, it's Eric Lavey of Sotheby's International Realty, a top real estate agent in Los Angeles, California.
What are your strengths? I find every successful agent is successful because they've tapped into their greatest strengths and brought them into this business.
I think anyone I think anybody, whether you're successful or just semi-successful or moderately successful, I think you have some strengths. I think, when I think about what my strengths are, I think one that comes to mind is probably I welcome difficult conversations, and I don't shy from them, and I get excited for them. And I think that
most people, by sheer human nature, and you might disagree with me on this, don't really like difficult conversations. No. How did you? Was that in your DNA, or is that something you learned and found out you're good at?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think some of that is DNA driven. I don't shy away from confrontation, right? And I could be an aggressive person by nature, but I also don't like confrontation that's not necessary, first and foremost, which is why I think I like a difficult conversation. I also am really comfortable in awkward situations. So I think difficult conversation.
That's it. End of interview right there. Comfortable in awkward situations. That's all we need to know.
Yeah, I think it's because most people are not. And so if you can excel in something that people are not, there's an advantage, right? And so on a competitive level, you will win there. But when you're thinking about a difficult conversations are where things either get resolved and move forward, or they don't. And if you don't move it forward, you really have stalemate and you don't have any progress or result. So the difficult conversation, you have to be up for it. It's the same way, Steve Scholl, my coach, he was a Pro Bowl, defensive end for the Miami Dolphins, played for Don Shula. And so, there's a lot of that in that coaching. And we talk about, being up for the game, and you may not be the most talented on the ground, but there's no way to really say I'm not the best. So every day you've got to come with that and say, okay, I get this. And of course, be equipped to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
I've been liking them for a long time, but until I started to coach really with Chris and Steve on tactical empathy, as we've always talked about, they haven't been as effective. And then now the last few years, you can have a very brief but effective, difficult conversation in a couple of sentences sometimes.
Well, less can be a lot more.
Sure. Yeah.
Because
if you ask them the questions.
As most listeners know, I'm a really big fan of Chris Voss and that book that I've read 7 times.
Yeah, he's the best.
So on these difficult conversations going into that, I think that's interesting because I didn't like difficult conversations at all. They seemed to turn into misunderstandings until I was equipped. For you, why did you like him before and what changed after and what did you learn about? You gave us a little bit of you've got to be ready for the game, but what are those things that get you ready? But do tell me the difference between like before you really learned it, when you were doing it up from your gut, and when you got those tools.
So I think early on, somebody that has an aggressive streak, an aggressive nature, and is not really fearful of a lot, it's being up for the moment. And so
you jumped out of a few airplanes or something? Like,
no, I would never do that. That's the dumbest thing ever.
That's just dumb.
That's
okay.
just dumb.
So anyway, I just want to see how much of an adrenaline junkie you are.
No, not at all. But for me, it's like, okay, this is the moment. And if you're going to do anything that is competitive, and what we do is highly competitive, and every year it gets more competitive, that is the moment. Those difficult conversations are going to define who you are in your business and probably who in your life when they all add up. And is one going to change your life? Probably not. It may if it's the right one, but probably not. But if you add 10, 20, 50, 100 of them up in a span of 5 or 10 years, that's going to make up who you are and who people perceive you as and what they'll mark you as. So do you want to be marked as the agent who, is highly emotional and a jerk? Or do you want to be labeled as the one who's very clinical and can't look around and out of the box? Or do you want to be, and so I wanted to be looked at as someone who says, look, it's not about ego. Putting the ego aside is the first and foremost thing, I think, to be really crafty at difficult conversations. Because there's nothing I can go into where if they think I'm a knucklehead, if they think I'm obnoxious, I'm okay with that. I mean, like, what's the worst that can happen? Someone thinks I'm obnoxious. It's happened before. It'll happen probably again.
Right.
So you can't be fearful of what the result will be. So for going into those, you just have to know that, okay, and we're all, there's a lot of people who do what we do that are really smart. And so you got to put the ego aside and put the perception aside and say, what's the best way to attack this problem? And so that's early on for me, what those difficult conversations were. And also I like when people there's an awkwardness to difficult conversations. And I weirdly like to be in awkward situations because I believe there's a moment of advantage there.
Here's what I wonder, because when I hear you say that, if you read my profile, like the Crystal Nose profile, apparently I don't like confrontation, but I don't know that that's true. I try to withhold because once I am there, I have to be careful not to be aggressive.
Yeah.
I don't want to piss anybody off because once it's there, I'm there.
I get it.
To your point, I wonder is it you say awkwardness, but there's that point of awkwardness that breaks through to authenticity.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, and that's another thing I think you have in your DNA or you don't. Like, I don't think you can become authentic. At times I've been too authentic in who I am. Look, I'm from a small little village in New England where people are pretty aggressive by nature. So if you put me in my little village where I'm from, I'm kind of like a lot of people. But you put me in sort of a cosmopolitan place like Los Angeles, New York, or, it becomes, well, New York's a different story because like whenever I'm talking with New Yorkers, I know I'm on the same level of aggressive.
But in LA, like, is there even grit there? I mean, if it's below 70.
Super chill.
Right.
Super chill here.
Completely different.
Yeah. And so I think you sort of go into that and say, okay, are you going to be okay with the outcome here?
So, yeah, that's a whole nother kind of part of that, learning that and maybe being in LA. But in LA, so now you kind of had this natural gut for getting to the awkwardness. I say to get the authenticity or to get to the root of the solution. On the flip side, what changed after you met Chris, worked with Steve, had experience in these difficult situations to see your mistakes? Kind of what's that transitioned into now?
It transitions in this last few years into being a severely active listener. And if that is not at the forefront of what you are trying to do every day, in every type of communication with people, by the way, because we can talk all day long about real estate, but if you're not practicing it in your life, then it's really hard to turn it on and off. So if you're not active listening, then you really can't fully practice what that tactical empathy and
so
problem solving.
Active listening. Yeah. People hear that word, and again, not to tout Chris Voss, have been held back a little bit lately, but that is, you read that book 7 times, and you learn a little bit about it. What is active? I think if you haven't done it, a lot of people think they know what that is. What is that?
Yeah, I guess maybe the easy way to describe that would be, without getting to what Chris would describe it as, or how he describes tactical empathy, because he has a very, very particular definition. But I think active listening is not coming into that conversation or that moment ready with the next thing. As real estate agents, the best of us have been shown scripts and dialogue, right? And those of us who've been in the business for 20, 30, 40, 50 years have a bunch of their scripts and dialogue, and they think it's so brilliant. And well, that's trying to push someone to do something and trying to push a conversation a certain way. Active listening, you have no idea what you're in for. You really don't. So if you're not actively listening and not thinking about anything else, and this is so hard. I mean, it's hard for me today when I walk into a room. I find myself sometimes not being active. I'm listening and I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. Then I'm blowing the whole sit down, because I need to hear everything from start to finish and then think about what that's about. And I'm there to find out. And so I'm always there to find out. And before Voss, my coach, Steve, we talked about getting to the truth, and getting to the truth was a way to say, what is somebody willing to do? And whether it's a seller, a buyer, or whatever, because we have to know what the truth is. If we don't know what the truth is, we're just there doing the dance, trying to get the business, and we don't know if there's business to be had. So as an active listener, it's truly being in the moment and having a conversation. And I think if you're somebody who loves interacting with people, then it's probably a little bit easier. And I find myself as somebody I like humanity. Most of the time. Sometimes I don't like humanity, but most of the time, it's fascinating to have a conversation with the people and just hear what's going on there. I can learn from them. I don't want to hear me talk. I want to hear them talk.
Thanks for listening to the Jere Metcalf Podcast, where top real estate agents tell how they do it. If you like this episode, please share it with friends. To find more episodes, search Jere Metcalf Podcast on any platform for podcasts, or go to JereMetcalfPodcast.com. That's JereMetcalf podcast.com.